Newton is the editor and propagator of the first law of motion. Aristotle and Galileo are the actual innovators. The original innovators, Aristotle and Galileo, should also be given credit. The contents of Newton's first law of motion existed earlier in scientific literature. The first part of the first law of motion was given by Aristotle in 350 BC or 2036 years before, and second part of Galileo in 1613 or 74 years before Newton. Newton gave a precise statement of the first law of motion combining two, but Newton never mentioned the names and contributions of Aristotle and Galileo. The details of the discussions are available on www.newtons99.com, in research papers, articles, in interviews. The e-book, The Newton's Laws of Motion in the 21st Century, is at final stages. What is the theme of this discussion? Do you mean Newton's first law of motion is not his original work?
Yes, Newton is not an innovator of the first law of motion. The contents of the first law of motion existed in the literature before Newton. These were published by Aristotle about 2036 years ago and Newton about 74 years earlier. Newton combined the works of Aristotle and Galileo in the Principia. Newton called these as axiom or self-proved or law of motion. The irony is that Newton did not acknowledge the works of Aristotle and Galileo.
What is Aristotle's assertion about the motion of bodies given in 350 BC?
Aristotle in 350 BC stated a continual external force is required to set and keep body in motion. So Aristotle's assertion has two parts. Number one, the first part is that the state of rest is natural state of body. This perception is supported by some physical examples. For example, a gunny bag remains lying on the ground or road or at any other place from morning to evening. It does not move by itself. Second point. The second part is that the body only moves due to applications of external force. The gunny bag moves if somebody pushes it or pulls it. It burst out for about 2000 years as supported by some physical examples. What now? It is abandoned as it is not found correct in some observations. However, its usefulness in some cases has to be considered.
How did Newton repeat Aristotle's assertion in the first part of the first law of motion?
The first part of first law of motion given by Newton states every body perseveres in its state of rest unless it is compelled to change that state by forces impressed thereon. First part, the body remains in state of rest. It implies that state of rest is natural state of body. It is first part of Aristotle assertion which was given 2036 years ago. Second part, the body moves from state of rest when impressed force, resultant force, net force or external force is applied on body. So this part is nothing but Galileo's assertion given about 350 years ago, and Newton repeated the same. Newton did not acknowledge Aristotle's name that he has given the same first part of first law of motion 2036 years ago.
Name the documents where Galileo elaborated on both the state of rest and the state of motion of bodies.
Galileo wrote letters on sunspots written to illustrious Mark Welser, the Duumvir of Augsburg in 1612. Published by the Italian Academia de Lindsay in 1613. It contains exceptionally useful statements and explanations about the state of rest and state of motion of bodies. Galileo's these documents are not well studied. It has statement 1, and the simple meaning of statement 1 is if body is placed at rest, it remains at rest. If body is pushed, then it moves in straight line with the same velocity or uniform velocity. The second part is only true for ideal system. Likewise, the second statement in Galileo's letters on sunspots is given by the simple meaning is the body has an inherent tendency to some motion or uniform velocity even if it is not pushed by an external force and if no resistive forces obstruct the body. It is like statement 1. This is true in an ideal system. Galileo expressed similar views in the book Dialogue Concerning Two New Sciences 1638 at page 195. The simple meaning is if body is set in motion in an ideal system free from resistive forces, then body moves forever in a straight line.
What is the second part of Newton's first law of motion? How did Newton repeat or re-quote it from the existing literature, that is, work of Galileo?
The second part of Newton's first law of motion is every body perseveres its state of uniform motion in right line unless it is compelled to change that state by forces impressed thereon. The second part of Newton's law may be understood in two parts. First part, every body remains in state of uniform motion in straight line, that is, every body keeps on moving in straight line with constant velocity if once pushed. It was stated by Galileo in 1613 in letters on sunspots, in the statement, and in the book Dialogue Concerning Two New Sciences in 1638. Second part, the state of uniform motion is changed by impressed forces thereon. Galileo has stated that uniform motion is changed when body is impeded by some obstacles. Some obstacle may be resistive forces or impressed forces. So second part of Newton's first law of motion was visualized by Galileo as early as 73 years before. But Newton did not mention the name of Galileo at all, who elaborated the second part of the law earlier.
Thus, you mean to say that Newton has requoted, restated, or re-edited the first law of motion from the existing work of Aristotle and Galileo.
Yes, Newton is editor and preacher or propagator of Aristotle's and Galileo's observations and perceptions or doctrines. Newton combined laws of Aristotle 350 BC and Galileo 1613 in a single precise statement known as first axiom or law of motion in the Principia in 1686. What Newton did not acknowledge the names of Aristotle and Galileo in the Principia. Interestingly, in the first edition of the Principia, Newton gave some references mentioning Robert Hooke's law of gravitation. Robert Hooke died in 1703 and the second edition of Principia was published in 1713. So Newton removed all references to Robert Hooke as Hooke was claiming that he has also contributed to a part of discovery of the law of gravitation published by Newton in the Principia. The papers regarding scientific discussions regarding Newton's all three laws of motion are available on website newton99.com, and my ebook Newton's Laws in the 21st Century is at final stages. Thank you.